Okay, Ethan is going to keep working with Fred to try to get, he's going to try calling in since his microphone is giving him. But Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and get started, please do.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good evening. Oh, it's been a long day already. Good evening, everybody. I'm Stephanie Dahl. I'm the chair of the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission, and today is the January 14th. We're going to call to order the meeting at 5:37 p.m. And so I guess we'll do roll of members.
Okay, Happy New Year, everybody. Kate Murphy is absent. Fred Wolf.
Fred is here, Pam. We're working on his audio.
Rob Eber.
Here.
Aaron Gradinsky. Stephanie Dahl.
Here.
Tori Leviton.
Here.
And Chelsea Scott.
Here. All right, perfect. I think at this point we will do the audience participation, and I do believe we have some of the audience or some of our members of our community here who want to speak. So I think if Emily, I don't know if you have names okay, Glenn Goldman, if you want to come up, obviously your address is on the screen, and please share with us.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for inviting us. I wanted to talk about the temporary permitting issue. And so that's why I'm here this evening.
Perfect.
I believe this initially started because of the Skolnicks. They're requesting temporary permitting for basically the simple reason of not wanting to impact their own privacy, their neighbors and their neighborhood, excuse me, traffic. Instead, they want to disrupt the trail users by blocking the pathway, causing the residents to have to walk on neighboring properties. They're impacting Cherrymore South by having their horse caretakers use our neighborhood as their parking lot. Excuse me. I believe in the code, it specifies that if you run a business, all parking must be on your own property and not impact the neighborhood. For this reason, they're choosing to impact our neighborhood because they know it would impact their own. We have had and will continue to have increased traffic, including commercial trucks, drive through and park, sometimes overnight in our neighborhood, simply for the benefit of not impacting their residents. So I guess, what does it mean when they really say they can't access their own property? Because I think that's the purpose of granting a temporary use permit, is because someone says they can't access their property in a manner that they want to. I can only speak to the Skolnicks and kind of our experience with them and what we see from from the trail that we abut to at 15 Huntwick Lane. In this case, it looks like the Skolnicks are asking for a temporary access because they can't access their own property from the front if it impacts their own interests. In this case, it looks like, I assume when they purchased their property, they're well aware of the rules and the topography of their own land, and they knew that they had to have a bridge to the creek to access the back half of their acreage. And for those of you that are not familiar, they have the Little Dry Creek goes through their property, and it's their attempts to access the back portion of their property, which I believe is about 3 acres, that has led to them asking for temporary use at times, so that they can access that property to take care of their horses. In the past, they've given riding lessons, etc., horseback riding lessons, etc. And all that traffic really funnels into our neighborhood, not their neighborhood. And again, we're in the Cherrymore South neighborhood. So in this case, even though they've kind of brought this to the table of wanting temporary access, they have a bridge on their property, it looks like. It's just that they're choosing not to use it. And so, it seems like if the city or city is going to allow people to have temporary access via the trail, they should really look at each person's request if they want to even go down this path and see, is it really reasonable and necessary, or is it just for the convenience of the homeowner and to the detriment of all the other property owners and trail users? I think you can pull up a satellite view of the property. If you do that, you can see where adjacent property owners have bridges and they don't have to use the trail to access their property. One of them, when they mow their property with a large commercial mower, they use the bridge on their property to access that other piece of land. There's no need for them to access it via the trail. And I'm not aware of anyone else in at least the trail that we use and abut to of having to have commercial vehicles on that trail. Just a second here. Regarding access, I think at least in this case, the Skolnicks, they're indicating that they can't access that that part of their land, but there are other alternatives for accessing it. If they don't want a full-size commercial truck, that's not the only means for them to access their property. Since they have that bridge, they could use an ATV and pull a small trailer with hay or whatever they want to take over to that other piece of land. It's not like they're landlocked. And so that would be a concern for temporary use if you have people say they're landlocked when they're really not landlocked. The other thing is that, at least what I would be concerned about in this case with temporary use is, would the temporary use be abused by people that say they need temporary use? In this case, the Skolnicks were told that they could not use the trail anymore. And in light of that, they still found ways around it by calling various people to give them access. At times they said, even since the last meeting, they said they had an emergency. I think they called the police. The police opened up the trail for them so they could get their farrier to fix a horseshoe on one of their horses. So that's been problematic. They've had the water tank replaced, I think at least one other, they put in one and then had to replace it. That was an emergency. So they had semis and other trucks parked in our neighborhood to access their property. So really, the use hasn't been that limited. It's been pretty extensive. And then at the, again, regarding the Skolnicks, at the end of the last meeting, when we discussed this and access was denied, Ms. Skolnick basically threatened us and our neighbors at the end of the meeting and said if she didn't get what she wanted, she'd make sure that she'd impact our neighborhood as much as possible, with cars and trucks continuously parking in our neighborhood. So I think, or I would at least appreciate the Parks Department looking at this issue and seeing, is it really something that the city and all the residents need to deal with? Or is this something where the current regulations that are on the books, they've worked for years and there hasn't been a problem? And are you just trying to appease one resident at the detriment of all the trail users? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldman. I appreciate your comments. Former Mayor Laura Chrisman.
Laura, you need to unmute yourself. Laura, can you hear us? Oh, there you go. You're unmuted.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
I am, Laura Chrisman. 18 Cherry Lane Drive. And I understand that the next meeting will be talking about e-bikes, but I wanted to address this commission a little bit with an outline of concerns that I will be bringing to the community so that hopefully we have an intelligent discussion on this subject. I'm just going to read. I think each of you have my comments in writing. I'm going to read them to you so they're read into the record for anybody who might be looking at them prior to the next meeting. Thank you for permitting me to express my concerns about e-bikes in Cherry Hills Village. The state of Colorado has passed a statute dividing e-bikes into 3 tiers. The state specifically gave each local jurisdiction the right to create their own rules governing e-bikes off of public roadways. The city of Colorado Springs did extensive outreach with its community to ascertain what would be the appropriate use of their trail system. The common concerns of their citizens were: 1, use of e-bikes will open the doors to other electric vehicles on trails. 2, there will be a lack of enforcement or regulation of use. 3, the addition of e-bikes and other electric vehicles will change the trail experience. 4, use of e-bikes will increase conflicts between users. And lastly, 5, e-bikes may impact trails themselves, causing damage. As a result of and in response to these concerns, the city of Colorado Springs does not permit e-bikes on their Tier 3 trails. They define a Tier 3 trail as having natural services and which are generally multi-use, meaning that they are shared among hikers, cyclists, joggers, dog walkers, and equestrians. Colorado Springs does permit e-bikes on Tier 1 and Tier 2, what they call urban trails that are wide and multi-surface. I believe that the concerns enumerated by citizens in Colorado Springs mirror the concerns many of our residents have pertaining to the use and enjoyment of our trail system. I believe that Cherry Hills Village has at least the same regard for citizen concerns and quality of life in the village as Colorado Springs. I've heard in defense of the use of e-bikes that they are no more or less problematic than standard bikes. This is simply not the case. The researchers in a report published in part in the journal Injury Prevention found that e-bikes were 3 times as likely to involve a collision with a pedestrian than either scooters or traditional bikes. E-bikes have a place, but not on our natural trails. Prohibition of e-bikes on natural trails is consistent with rules promulgated by both Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the National Forest Service. Whether our hard surface trails are wide enough to permit the confluence of strollers, joggers, equestrians, pedestrians, dog walkers, bikes, and e-bikes, a careful review and study should be made. Please remember that e-bikes under Colorado law include 3-wheeled bikes that are considerably wider than a traditional bike. In addition, please take note that the speed limit in our fair city is a maximum of 30 miles an hour. E-bikes can meet or exceed that speed, especially those that combine both physical pedaling and an electric motor. Many e-bike users want access to trails because it's safer than speeding along roadways. It is, but not for the other users. This is not a fair trade-off. Pedestrians with dogs and strollers and equestrians need time to get off of a trail and make way for e-bikes. Even though the e-bikes do not have the right-of-way, if they take the right-of-way, the other trail users do not have time. It's very dangerous. In Vail, I walked the paved trail from East Vail. E-bikes have recently been introduced. In my experience, the e-bikers do not yield the right-of-way to anyone. I have heard them yell at slow bikers and walkers alike, "Get out of the way, I have the right-of-way." There are many areas on even our paved trails that pedestrians with dogs or strollers would have difficulty moving off of the trail. That is all I have to present at this time, and I want to thank you for taking and hearing my concerns. That's all.
Thank you very much for sharing those with us. We appreciate it. Beth Goldman.
Hi, I'm Beth Goldman. I'm also 15 Huntwick. I'm Glenn's wife. I just, I had sent in some maps, some aerials. I don't know how to
We
show
did.
them.
We did get those. All the commissioners do have those. They were sent out to us.
Okay. So, I mean, really the point was if you kind of really zoom in on those, onto the property, their claim, I guess, at the last two meetings that the Skolnicks were at was they claimed that in order to make a bridge or have access, they would have to bridge over their swimming pool, which is completely absurd. And so if you look at the map, you can actually, if you really zoom in, you can even see the trails, like from people having access to, I believe there's a bridge. So you can see the pathways. So they can travel, they could basically build either way, a pathway for them to get to a bridge. So again, I don't think when they're claiming that they have to drive over their swimming pool that they're really, they're not being honest, because if you look at the plan, their site plan, you can see that's absurd. And also it shows the other bridges that the two neighbors next door to them use. I'd also like to make a point that if they feel the need to use a cul-de-sac to park all of their cars, all of the cars of all of the students that are taking horseback riding lessons, and as well as they have two people that I guess take care of their horse and give the lessons as well. And then they also park two cars. And so that one picture of all the cars parked in the cul-de-sac, that's typically what our cul-de-sac looks like in the summertime. And it's all their cars. And they do a lot of speeding. And also the manager gives out the address of one of the neighbors so that people can find the cul-de-sac. And so people are knocking on their door, asking directions to the stable. So obviously it's all an issue. They have a cul-de-sac right next to their house. It's literally immediately outside their driveway. I assume they don't want to use that cul-de-sac because they wouldn't want to bother their own neighbors. So clearly this is just a case of not wanting to impact themselves and just impacting the people with the smaller properties behind them. I think 3 acres is plenty of property to do as they want without impacting everybody else. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say is that I feel that if you started to give people access with the trail, the only people that really need access would be the people that have those large properties that might be doing farming or horses or whatever. And I think, we could end up with a big problem where our trails end up becoming kind of like the work truck alleys for all of the large properties. And that's obviously a huge problem. And I don't know how you go back once you allow that. So obviously, Glenn and I are quite against the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goldman. We appreciate your being here and sharing your comments with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
There are no further public comments. Is that correct, Emily?
That's correct. That's everyone we have.
Okay, perfect. We will now move on to the consent agenda. All of the commissioners should have received it in our packet from our commission meeting on November 12th, 2020. We did not have a December meeting. Hopefully everybody had a moment to review and go over. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Okay. Then can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Commissioner Eber moved. Can we have a second?
A second.
Commissioner Levitin, second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? All right, motion carries. Thank you. All right, so we will move on to our unfinished business from our last meeting. And the first is the use of the motorized vehicles on trails, temporary permitting. So Emily, I know you've kind of prepared a memo for us, so I will let you start and take it from here, and then we'll have some discussion.
Thank you. Good evening. And thank you to the Goldmans for both of your comments on this issue also. This item is the question of whether PTRC recommends creating some type of system for temporary permits to allow for private motorized vehicles on city bridle trails. For context, the council asked PTRC to research the section of the municipal code regarding motorized vehicle use on trails and consider developing a policy for different appropriate uses. For clarity's sake, we broke this issue during this meeting into the two separate items. So we'll discuss this possible system of temporary permits first, and then I'll ask for PTRC's feedback, and e-bikes will be a separate discussion afterward. Currently, the municipal code does forbid vehicles on all city trails, with exceptions for public vehicles like police, fire, parks, and utility companies accessing easements within the trail. Currently, the only way for private homeowners to gain vehicular access to a trail is by applying for a right-of-way permit. Right-of-way permits are occasionally granted to homeowners to access parts of their property to perform work that otherwise wouldn't be possible. The permits are time limited and generally provide access for a day. They're only issued after staff verifies that there is no access to that area of property other than the bridle trail. And right-of-way permits require the owner to provide a certificate of liability insurance, listing the city as additionally insured, and a $10,000 bond that must remain in effect for 2 years. So they come with significant requirements. Additional requirements are outlined in the municipal code. I won't go through all of them, but that section of the code is attached in PTRC's packets. So the question before PTRC is whether there should be some other type of temporary permit that would allow for private vehicle use. This process wouldn't apply to utilities that hold easements on city bridle trails or change their right of access in any way. If PTRC is interested in creating a permit system, staff suggests that permits be granted through an administrative process rather than through PTRC or through council, based on defined criteria, that access be permitted a specific limited number of times per year, and access requiring staff time will require advance notice. If PTRC is interested in this type of permit system, staff is requesting that the commission make a motion and provide us some guidance so that we would be able to bring a draft outline of a possible program to you at the next meeting. If PTRC believes the existing right-of-way permit system is sufficient, an alternate motion is also provided in your memo. I'm happy to answer any questions. We have Parks Operations Supervisor Roberts on the line. Director Goldie is also on the call, and Pamela Broyles, who handles all of our right-of-way permit processing for the city. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Emily, I would ask, and I don't know which one of you maybe can answer this, is how many times, I would say on average a year, do you all get applications for right-of-way permits?
Across the board or from homeowners?
From homeowners.
I will let Pamela or Jay answer that question if I can hand it to one of you.
Well, and I'd also like to just narrow that even further, perhaps, of say private homeowners who want to use public right of ways to access private properties.
I can answer that question. I don't have the number in front of me. Pamela did do some research since we began the permitting. And the number is, on average, less than 5 a year are allowed to use the trail to do things such, and mostly it's for tree trimming and those type of things. If we go out and investigate and a homeowner is simply wanting to use the trail to avoid having their tree trimmer drive on their lawn, and they can get easy access through their own property, and all they have to do is drive across the lawn, open a gate, take down a small section of fence, then it's denied. But if there's no way to get around to the back of the house and the trail is truly the only access, then we do allow that. But I would say the average is 3 to 4 a year. So it's not a lot of access that we do allow.
Okay.
I would just add the importance, I think, that we added the permitting process so that we had a way to, monitor and track who's been on the trail. So if there is trail damage, at least if we have a right-of-way permit or something showing that there was a vehicle back there, a trailer or something, if there is any damage to our trail, which has happened in the past, it's not city staff and the expense of the city paying for that if it is in fact due to somebody accessing the trail with mud or heavy equipment or destroying fences, whatever. So I think the permitting process was put in place for a good reason, so that we have a record of who is on our trail.
Thank you both very much. I will open it for any of our commissioners if they have questions or comments that you would like to make.
I just have a question. So is the main reason why the increase in the change to the permit, is it on the table mostly because of the pandemic and an increased usage, or were there other reasons that may have caused this to come up? I mean, I understand too the Goldman's comments in that specific instance. I just mean in general. I mean, is the pandemic or the increased use of our trail system a big reason for this possible additional right-of-way permit, request? Or again, are there just other reasons? I mean, for example, too, I know with the drought, there were some issues with some of the different water sources and things like that. But those are more, I believe some of them were city property and some of them were private. So, just curious.
Oh, go ahead.
No. You answer and then I'll ask my follow-up question on that.
I was going to say the reason that this has come up is because City Council saw a possible need for it and asked PTRC to look into it more. Quite frankly, because of the increased use on the trails, this might cause more conflict and more increased use if we were to go to some sort of additional permitting system for more motorized vehicle use, just with the level of increased traffic that we're seeing due to the pandemic.
The tie that I was making, and just reading the memo too, it starts by saying that the increased trail use, I thought maybe there were more fixes that were needed, more maintenance. Again, I mentioned the drought. I know there were some in my neighborhood that were concerned about just the dwindling water levels for some animals in and around some of the different water sources. So I didn't know if some of those reasons had increased the need for additional, motorized vehicles to come out and fix things. But okay, I was just, the main impetus is kind of what I was getting at as to but I understand it's coming from council, so appreciate that.
And just to follow up on that, Emily, I know this is coming from council, but other than the issue that got taken that was from us with the Skolniks up to council, have there been any other right-of-way permits or issues that have kind of come up that are causing council to want to look at this?
I don't believe there are any that can't be solved within or that can't be addressed using our current right-of-way permit system. I'd ask Pamela and Jay to confirm that, but I believe we haven't had any that don't fit within the existing right-of-way permitting.
Well, you wouldn't see any that we have because they would have been denied. And we do deny a number of them every year. And council may be hearing from residents that have been denied. I don't know if they've heard, more than our recent one that Parks and Trails heard a few months ago. But I would assume that those people being denied may be going to their council people too. And that may have played into a factor as why the city council wanted to have PTRC review this.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Commissioner Levitin, I feel like I see a hand raised, so I'm not sure if.
Yeah, I don't know how that works that much. I will repeat, as I said in July, August, I don't remember which meetings, that when we moved into this property, we were astounded by the lengths that the previous owners had gone to prevent ever needing to access public lands to service their barn and their horses, with the small, tiny exception of maybe the entrance to a private driveway, which can be circumvented from Quincy and doesn't, it's a no joke, 20 square feet. Chelsea, you've been there. Is that really even on the private driveway? And to say they just can't do it because they have to keep their pool where they want was really upsetting to me. And I hold my position that I don't believe they should have the right, which leads me to ask Director Goldie, do you feel they have been knowingly violating the code, the Skolniks, all these years because they feel like that rule should not apply to them? And if that is really the only case that's influencing this remanding from city council back to us to not change anything and just to be more strict. Is that the case, Mr. Goldie?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think that we just got Fred's audio. If we can just pause to test that.
Barely.
You're very quiet, Fred.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, Ethan, so hang up the phone and keep the cell phone.
And I will, before you answer, Director Goldie, and you may answer however you want, but I will, just to kind of keep us on track of what we're here to talk about right now, is whether I think the commission wants to even entertain this. I don't necessarily want to go down the rabbit hole of the Skolniks and kind of get involved in that. I think that our duty right now is to determine if we even want to entertain having any sort of other permit process other than the one that currently exists. And so I think maybe more to Commissioner Leviton's question is, does any of our city staff feel that the current process that is in place is not working?
Yeah, I can
To
appreciate
keep it
that,
on more general terms.
that perspective. That makes a lot of sense. What do you think, city staff?
In my opinion, the current system is working well, 99% of the time. It's a good system. It's taken us a long time to get the controls that we do have now. When we took over from South Suburban was not paying attention. There were homeowners using it. There were utility companies that were destroying it, even though they had the right to use those trail easements because of their own easements. So in my opinion, it's a pretty good system right now.
I would concur with Jay on that.
I guess to kind of move this along, I would tell you my position would be that I don't think we need a motion, but I don't believe that we need a different permitting system than one that is already in place. But I don't know if any of the other commissioners would like to speak differently, and we can have that discussion and see if we want to provide some direction to the city.
Let me go ahead and jump in if you don't mind,
ahead.
Chair. A number of questions that will help frame the discussion for me. That I appreciate Mr. Goldie's comment that the system appears to be working, of using, it sounds to me, the existing public right-of-way system. But what I am trying and looking at is, I am not sure that that public right-of-way permit system is designed to cover our trail system. So we may need to, and I'm going to ask your indulgence, that we walk through the different parts of the public right-of-way permitting provisions to make sure that if we want to rely on it, we know what we're getting. Let me step back for a moment. Section 11.310 of our code defines what trails are. It defines ones that the city owns, leases, or has an easement, basically anything. I also think that what we are being asked to look at tonight, and I just want to clarify, is that it is under 11.350, permitting an administrative policy for use of city property, public parks and trails. Under subsection A, it says the city owns and maintains public parks and trails for the benefit of and use by the public. The city manager is hereby authorized to promulgate an administrative policy and rules for public parks and trails and other city property
I'm sorry
involving.
to interrupt. This is not the section of the code that we're looking at.
I understand that. But the authority that is given for us to promulgate a policy seems to me to be coming from 11.350A1, specifically use of space limitations, including temporary closures of areas. Because I don't see anywhere else other than the 11.2 section on public right-of-way permits that this can be addressed. So what I'm saying is when the council asked us to look at this and whether or not to come up with a new policy, guess I'm confirming that the authority that they are using to ask us this question is 11.350A1. That's the first question.
I don't believe council was referencing a specific section of the code when they asked PTRC to review the question. So their prompt was for PTRC to review the existing motorized vehicle section of the code
Of 11.350, 380.
380, and consider developing a policy for motorized vehicle use.
Okay. I think it's important to know the authority because I think it goes to the question of whether or not we have the authority within the village as a whole to address this question. I'll move on though. 11.310 defines a trail to be anything that the city either owns, leases, or has an easement. And it's important because if you look at the rest of 11.2 on public rights of way permits, it gets to the question of whether or not it covers trails. The reason I say that is if you look at 11.210, it says that the purpose of the article is to establish principles, standards, procedures for placement of facilities, construction, excavation, encroachments, and work activities within or under, or excuse me, or upon any public right of way. Public right of way is defined and work activities is defined later on in this section in 11.220. Public right of way is any street, way, place, alley, sidewalk, easement, park, square, median, parkway, boulevard, or plaza that is dedicated to public use. It doesn't specifically say trail. So to the extent that we have trails that we get by easement, a public right of way could include that trail. It doesn't say trails that are owned. So I'm not sure that it applies to public right of way. Secondly, the definition of work a little bit further down means any labor performed within a public right of way, including excavation, construction of streets, fixtures, tree trimming, construction, maintenance, or repair of underground facilities, maintenance of facilities, installation of overhead poles for any use. It doesn't include in the definition of work using public rights of way to access other property. So to the extent that this policy and this provision and the article applies to public right of way permits, I am not sure that allowing our trails to be used to access private properties is within the definition of what the public right of way permit process is defined to do. I will note for inclusion that 11.2, excuse me, let me find it. 11240 permit required, subsection G, says the public right-of-way permit process is to allow for work within the city's right-of-way. The permit may also be used to cover the need to occupy the right-of-way for work outside of the right-of-way at the sole discretion of the city. So from the standpoint of using that provision to allow permitting use of our trails to access others, I think that it's possible to do, but it then brings up the question of the sole discretion of the city and whether or not the council has asked us to provide some guidelines about what will frame the discretion of the city. With that regulatory foundation, the question that I have for you is, or for all of us to consider, is how many instances, and I appreciate the fact that Mr. Goldie said that it's 4 or 5 a year that it comes up, some of which are denied. How many real properties face physical impairment on their ability to access all of the parts of the property? And the reason I distinguish that is, as Commissioner Levitin mentioned, a landowner always has the ability to landscape and construct their property in a way to make sure that all parts of their property are accessible. And their failure to do so doesn't automatically mean that the city needs to get involved in providing a permit to bail them out from their own failure to act accordingly. So again, if there are true impossibilities, physical impossibilities of access because of things, then you may want to consider having this permit in place. But I find it very difficult to understand whether or not this is a problem that doesn't really exist or whether this is a solution looking for a problem. I understand that it came up as a result of one particular property owner that apparently, from what it sounds like from the public comment tonight, continues to violate our trails, but that's a different issue. But I guess I'm trying to understand whether we really have an issue here that needs recommendation and a review. I will note that I am a huge protector of property rights of the city. Our trails are sacred. Our trails are even more heavily used now as a result of COVID. But I think it's that with this, it's only a precedent that will have a lot of us using our trails even more so in the future, once we learn how fabulous they are. And I think it's a question of whether or not the public's right and the city's right to protect its property should be subject to potential use by private parties for their convenience, or anything absent an impossibility. And I'll stop and let's discuss that.
Emily, are we still talking about the Jay? I'm sorry, I forget his last name.
Commissioner Wolf, we're talking in general, not specifically to this one property.
Okay, but I thought we had resolved that whole private property access issue on the trail near Woody Hollow Park. It sounds like that's still in play.
No, the council denied that permit and instructed the commissioners to come up to consider whether we need to have a policy to apply this in general.
And I guess I'll jump in here, and because I'm listening to Commissioner Eber, and I think the first question is for the commission. do we think, based on the information that's been provided by the city, that we need to, not what it would be, not what the parameters would be, not anything of that nature, but do we need an additional avenue for permits to be granted? I think that's the first question, because if the answer is no, we don't need to go further. If the answer is yes, then I think we can have further discussion about what the where the authority of that comes from, what that would look like, and give that direction to the city. But I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going down that rabbit hole if we don't even think we need to. So I guess at this point, I would like to hear from all the commissioners in terms of, do you think we even need to entertain and have another avenue for those landowners to be able to access their properties other than the current right-of-way permitting that is provided by the city? So Commissioner Eber, what is your opinion?
Well, with due respect to what you just mentioned, do we need another policy other than the one we have using the right-of-way permit process is exactly what I am asking, whether we really have the authority to use that process right now. And the reason I say that is if we're using 11.3 whatever G, 11.280G, I think it was, if that's the authority that we are using in the city to allow this case-by-case evaluation that is not a use of the public right-of-way, it's a use of a public right-of-way to access non-right-of-way property. If that's the authority, then the question is that something that we are comfortable with? I mean, if that's the authority that exists to the city right now already, it says it can, it's on a case-by-case basis at the sole discretion of the city, look to recover the need to occupy right-of-way for work outside of the right-of-way, which is what I think, is the question. Can you access via a trail your private property to do work? And if that's the authority, that's the permit system that is in place. Do we need something different than that?
That's my question.
Well, let me just ask you though, because this applies to things that are in the public right of way. And again, as I define trails for a purpose, and that is trails include what's owned, trails that's owned, leased, or has an easement. But there are many trails that are owned that are not within the public right, they aren't in the definition of public right of way.
Well, I mean, and this may be, I feel like this might be a little bit, I understand where you're going. And I think an argument on the other side is when you look at the definition of public right of way means any public street, way, place, alley, sidewalk, easement, park, square, median, parkway, boulevard, or plaza that is dedicated to public use.
But does
or
not have the word
maintained by
trail.
the city, except that trail is not listed anywhere in here. And so the argument is none of these also we don't have sidewalks. Sidewalk is not defined within this code. And so I think you're taking your interpretation. And so I don't know. And so I think that, I mean, I think the question, are you posing like, does the city even have authority to issue the initial permits that are currently being issued? Is that your position?
I want to make sure that we have that authority, and I'm not positive that we do.
But I think that's a different question than that was posed tonight. So I'm not saying we shouldn't address that at all, because I think what was given to us by council was, do we want to have a different system? Whether or not this system is correct or not, I think is a different question, and we can absolutely address it. But do we want a different system than what currently exists to address these permits? And if the answer is no, then we can move on from that. And then to your point, Commissioner Eber, we can look and see, is the authority there to even go forward with the way it is? And I don't know if our city attorney is on, but if not, I think we need to have a discussion with them as well.
And I appreciate that, Chair. My comment, though, is that if there is no authority to use this current system, and if we think there needs to be a system, we need to come up with it. or find the authority to come up with it. And so I'll take a step back and say, okay, the question is, do we need a different system? And I will tell you that I am from the camp that the city needs to actively and vigorously and strenuously protect its property rights, excuse me. And that is that our trails should be used for trail purposes, with the only exception being for those that are listed in the statute, in the regulation, which is basically for utility work. And I don't believe that allowing me to trim my trees by use of a public trail is in the city's interest. People should know when they buy a property, how they're going to access all of their property. They should, if they don't like that, they don't have to buy it. Once they buy it, they should know that they need to figure out a way to access all parts of their property with their landscaping, construction, or anything else, so that there should never be a need for anybody to have to use the city's trails to access their property, to do any work on their property, operate their property, whatever it is. In the case of the Skolnick family that came before, they wanted it so they could run a business and allow hay to get there. That was a decision that seems to have been made after they purchased their property. And, their lack of foresight appears to be one of the bases upon which the city council decided to deny their permit. So, I'll stop and say, I don't think we need to have a process, because I don't think we should be granting anybody permits over our private right, our public trails to access private property.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wolf, the question being posed is, does PTRC recommend creating a system of temporary permits to allow for motorized vehicle use on city bridle trails? What is your position?
Well, I apologize for getting into all this after the fact, but I'm trying to just keep this as clear as I can in my mind. We're trying to get back to whether e-bikes should be allowed on our trails. Yes or no? Is that what we're talking about?
No, we have split those two issues. So the issue that we are discussing right now is that currently there is
vehicle trails to do any kind of maintenance on private property.
Yeah, that it would become an administrative process to get a permit.
Yeah, that seems very basic to me. If somebody needs to have Davy Tree come in and they can't access it from their driveway or something normal, can they get a permit to use our trail for 2 hours on a specific day to take care of this? That seems very straightforward to me. I would love to opine on the e-bike issue. I've shared some of my thoughts earlier this week with Emily, and I have kind of.
We're going to come back to that, Fred, so that we take one thing at a time. So I guess my then follow-up question for you is, understanding where you are, that if somebody needs to come in and deal with the tree or do something like that, the current system that is in place that allows for public right-of-way permits, do you think an additional system needs to be put in place, or is that one sufficient?
I think the existing system is sufficient.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, Commissioner Scott.
So based on the information that I have and not seeing any new and dire needs that have come about, I think the existing system is sufficient.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Scott. Commissioner Levitin.
I did have a question for Commissioner Eber. So what are you implying is that the city doesn't have the authority to use these public rights of way to ever access private property? And that might be something that we should consider. But, you know, I'm taking the city staff's recommendations that they're happy with the system in place. If they want to review access to private property, it's at their discretion. Is that correct, city staff?
I'm not sure if Jay's still here. That is correct. As far as the permitting system now, the only thing with going to Rob's, since I'm the one who processes most of these permits, the request that I get most often is a request to remove something like a dead tree. So if, you know, if there is a dead tree that is abutting a trail in a private property, you know, it does prevent a safety hazard. So there may be times when a large tree, it would be difficult to access that tree from the front of the property. But by having that permitting system in place, it is a bond, it is approved, we know when they're there, we know who is there, and we can protect the citizens, we can protect our trails. And so I think there probably are instances where, you know, very few, where they do need to access the trail, but that would be something that I've seen in the past. Generally, that $10,000 bond encourages residents to find a different option. And that is exactly what happened. I got a call this morning. Somebody wanted to use a trail to trim a tree. And I said, you know, fill out a permit, a $10,000 bond. They're like, nope, suddenly they could do it from the front of their property. So the permitting system itself sometimes takes care of, you know, people taking advantage of using the trail system.
Thank you. Great explanation.
Let me jump in, Commissioner Leviton, because you mentioned, you know, if the city is using 11240 as authority to provide permits that are addressed to occupy a right-of-way for work outside the right-of-way, and they can be issued at the sole discretion of the city, then the city has authority to use the right-of-way permit provisions. So that question appears to be moot at this point. If you look, however, at, again, the definition of trail, I mentioned it includes owned and easements and leased. If you look at 11280, city review and approval for an application for a public right-of-way permit, subsection D, it says permits for work within trail easements will only be issued if the trail easement has an underlying utility easement. The city is not authorized to grant any additional use of trails other than the use granted the city by the trail easement. So the question that I have is, how much of the city trails are by easement, and do the easements all allow for motorized use, or are they limited only to non-motorized, consistent with 11380? Because if those easements are limited to non-motorized use, this is moot. None of this matters on all the parts that are trail easement.
And I think to your point, Commissioner Eber, unfortunately, I don't think it's a question we can answer tonight, because that is going to be a trail by trail, easement by easement, to know what was basically allowed within those easements. And so without, you know, obviously it is an issue, and I can understand where you're coming from, because there are certain trails that maybe there are no right-of-way permits that should ever be issued on. So I can hear what you're absolutely saying. I think that might be something, and we can have a conversation with the city about getting more information, because I think we'd need to pull those easements and find out and kind of make that decision. For right now, what I am hearing from everybody is that there is nobody has a belief that we need to create any sort of additional system beyond what exists, and with the caveat that we can look at what the easements have actually granted and not granted at a different moment. But that no additional system needs to be granted, that the system that is in place is sufficient for what needs to be reviewed if a homeowner needs to get access through a trail. Is that a fair statement?
For me, that's a fair
Yes.
statement.
Okay.
I
With
think the one issue with the Skolniks it's a problem that we inherited, we didn't create. And I think the current city staff is going to be a lot more careful to prevent situations like that from happening again.
And I would add that the only added things that I would put in and the report back to city council is that I personally don't believe, I'm fine with using the existing process of right-of-way as long as the authority is that G provision of 11-240 or whatever, 40G. But I want to express my hope that council recognizes that at least I think there is little to no reason that we should ever be granting any permits that allow access over our public trails onto private property.
And what if the exceptions that Pamela brought up, that it's just extremely impractical, and if they're willing to drop a $10,000 bond, that maybe that can be one reasonable exception, and maybe a complete ban may not be prudent?
Well, thank you, everybody. Emily, do you have enough from us in terms of our recommendations? So you can take that back to council? Did we lose Emily?
I just got a blurb saying that Laura is now our contact or our running the meeting. So I don't know if we lost Emily.
Oh,
Sorry, this is Ethan from city staff. Emily was having a little trouble with her connection. She's trying to log back in. So it looks like she's getting in right now.
oh, there she is.
Hello.
Oh, you
Sorry.
missed all the good stuff, Emily. You missed it all.
I'm sorry.
I said you
So you
missed
just
it
say
all.
yes.
So Chair Dahl, I can talk to Emily. I think we have enough information to go back to council
Thank you.
with your recommendation and all the caveats that everybody else mentioned.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. Emily, to summarize, the recommendation is no new system. All right. Next on unfinished business is the use of motorized vehicles on trails, specifically e-bikes. The issue to be posed that Emily has placed in her memo for us is the possible changes to the municipal code regarding the use of e-bikes on trails in Cherry Hills Village. So Emily, I will let you go from here. And I know Commissioner Wolf wants to speak on this as well, but I'll let you start us off.
Okay, and I apologize. My internet connection is still a little unstable, so if you can't hear me, please let me know, stop me. Okay. Thank you for bearing with my tech issues. So yes, this item is specifically about changing the same section of the municipal code regarding e-bikes. At our previous meeting in November, PTRC had heard from Bicycle Colorado and learned about different classes of e-bikes as well as legislation in other jurisdictions. We also talked briefly at the last meeting about enforcement. So at tonight's meeting, we have both Sergeant Eric Strummel and Sergeant Noah Rolfing available on the call to answer any specific questions related to enforcement from the commission. So at the last meeting, PTRC had requested staff bring an inventory of trails and trail surfacing within the city. So that matrix is attached in your packets. And staff at this time is recommending that the commission suggest a preliminary proposal to change the municipal code to allow certain e-bikes on trails. Staff also recommends the commission continue to request public input for the February meeting. I'm prepared to put something in the Village Crier advertising that meeting to continue asking for public input. No motion is necessary for this item, but staff will bring suggested language for code language. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm interested to hear the commission's thoughts.
Okay, Fred, I know you wanted to speak on this, so I will let you kick us off.
Well, I've just made some observations over the last month, 6 weeks. I walk the trails every single day, and I'm not on the High Line. I'm right below the High Line, and I've thought about this a lot. And then I've read the reports about what other jurisdictions to the north of us and to the south of us are allowing regarding e-bikes. I really don't distinguish between classes 1, 2, and 3, because I think it's absolutely impossible for somebody to say classes 1 and 2 are allowed here, but class 3 is not. Who is going to stop an e-bike and say, are you class 1, class 2, or class 3, and can you prove it? And all it just gets out of hand. Bottom line is this with me. I think we could allow e-bikes on the Highline Canal, but only on the Highline Canal, and they will not be permitted on any of our dirt bridle trails throughout the entire village. To me, that makes sense. When we get off the High Line, our trails are very narrow in spots, and even mountain bikes can really chew up a trail surface that foot traffic does not do. So that's where I am right now. I have other things to say, and I can say that at the end of the meeting when we have other comments. But I can see, the underpasses are nearing completion, and we're going to have more traffic on the Highline Canal. I do agree with the letter that was written that said that the bicyclists actually are the ones that seem to be traveling faster than e-bikes, and I agree with that. I see them all the time, and it's an enforcement issue, and I just don't know. I've not talked to Chief Michelle about this specifically, but I know in the past, over the years, we have had Cherry Hills policemen on mountain bikes going back and forth. I don't know how frequent that was. I haven't seen them in the last couple of years at all. So I don't know that policy or that practice is still in place. But that's how I feel about e-bikes right now.
Thank you.
Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Wolf. And Sergeant Stremmel and Sergeant Rolfing, I know that one of the questions that had come up last time we had a conversation was really surrounding what is like the viability about actually enforcing anything on the trail. I know we have a speed limit on the Highline Canal and on our trails, but I think many of our experiences is that it isn't really enforced, and I don't know how it, I know it's difficult to enforce because there's a lot of resources that go into enforcement on that, and then it pulls resources from other places. And so I think the commission was really looking to you all to kind of give us some information in terms of how often, our trails are patrolled for kind of speeding on them, and then also, what is done and what can be done and different things like that. If either of you would mind speaking to that.
No, Noah.
Go ahead. Eric, do you have something to say?
Sure. So we don't patrol the Highline Canal for speeding. It's not something that we're able to enforce under the model traffic code. Speed, that has to be done on a street or a roadway, and the Highline is not considered that for enforcement purposes. So that wouldn't be something that we would do on the Highline is enforce speed. And it would need to be posted so that anybody bicycling throughout the city would be able to see different, just like on a road, you'd have to have speed limit signs posted so that they knew what it was.
This may be a dumb question, and I don't know if someone from the city can jump in then, is that on our trails, why do we have speed limits if they won't be enforced? Or they can't be?
You're talking specifically about the Highline, Stephanie, because I guess that 15 miles an hour, that applies to all of our bridle trails? Is that right?
Well, I think
That's
what I
correct.
heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Sergeant Stremmel, is that under the model traffic code, you all can only issue citations if it's on a roadway,
Correct.
not
Correct.
on any of the trails or Highland Canal or anything of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct, because the model traffic code specifically defines what roadways and et cetera we can issue citations for specific violations for. And unfortunately with the speeding violations, it dictates that it has to be on a roadway.
Okay, understood.
So if
Go ahead.
I might,
Bike,
we would
So the
have
bike-
to,
the bike path that's adjacent to Quincy throughout the entire city. If cyclists were in excess of 20 miles an hour on those bike paths, you cannot issue them a citation. Is that correct? Even though they're immediately adjacent to the paved street.
So the bicycle paths that are on Quincy, the speed limit on Quincy is 30. So if a bicyclist was going over 30, we technically could issue them a citation for that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
and so what I was going to add is that we currently can't enforce speed limits on trails. It would take, and I would have to speak to the city attorney, somewhere else in the code outside of the model traffic code, the city would have to have its own code to enforce that. Which is possible, which is one thing that this group should be looking at. But then I can let the officers speak to, even though it's enforceable, the staffing needed to take somebody off the street and onto the Highland Canal is a whole different issue.
Yeah. And Jay, I don't think that the speed issue is at all applicable to our dirt bridle trails. It's only, in my mind, it's only applicable to the Highland Canal. So
It seems to me it's equally applicable everywhere, that you certainly wouldn't want high speeds on our bridle trails.
right, absolutely. Yeah. But Rob, you had a couple of weeks ago a confrontation with an e-bike on one of our dirt bridle trails, and you informed them that they weren't allowed on here, and it became kind of heated, I guess. And that's what I think. Here's where I think we need to draw the line. Yes, on the High Line, but you cannot exit the High Line onto one of our bridle trails with an e-bike, regardless of what class it's in. So that seems very straightforward to me. I can't imagine making it any more complicated than that.
Well, then my question is that's understandable, but how do our residents that live on those side trails then, if they want to take their e-bike to the High Line, if this group makes that recommendation, the enforcement of them getting from their homes down one of our bridle trails to the High Line, I don't want to have, it's not good practice to have something on the books that we're not going to enforce or can't enforce. So it's just something to think about.
I will say, when we look at the types of trails in Cherry Hills Village that was provided in Exhibit A, there's our natural bridle path, which is grass, crusher fine. I apologize if y'all can hear the background noise in my house. And then there's asphalt. And so I don't know if maybe, and I can understand Commissioner Wolf's comment in terms of, let's just make this very simple in terms of only on the Highline, because I think in previous discussions, what has been brought up to us is that the surrounding jurisdictions allow for these e-bikes. And so for them, there is no real way to enforce it, that once they come from Denver over onto our side of the Highland Canal, technically they're in violation of our municipal code, but to get through to the next, over to Greenwood Village. And so, the problem, I think, so I understand that, but I do think we have other, we do have asphalt where bicyclists can go just as fast as e-bikes. And so I don't know if we want to take this kind of step by step in terms of, looking at natural bridle path grass and saying, do we want to allow e-bikes on that? Yes or no? Or is it a kind of a one big decision?
I think I would like to provide some perspective. Doing lots of research on this just for practice. Prohibition has just not been working at all. So I don't see how we can enforce it. We can have it as a law, but it's not changing the behavior of the people. I did want to address what Ms. Chrisman, are you still listening? I think so. Just the mere fact that a vehicle can go over 30 should never preclude it, else nobody can drive in Quincy, because all of our vehicles can go over 30. So that alone shouldn't be the grounds. I really don't like differentiating either between the classes, and I'm not convinced that class 1 or 2 versus class 3 is going to have any different of an impact as a regular bike on the trails. I'm just not sure. I was going to ask the police force sergeants, have you considered the fact that a mere presence, just hanging out on Quincy and the Highland Canal, can be a deterrent to violations of dangerous behavior? That hanging out I've actually seen you guys hanging out at Three Pond Park. Right there, just when people see law enforcement, they are way less likely to break the rules. So I don't know if you have any questions on that or any answers to that. Strategy.
From the police department standpoint, we do try to get out on the canal as much as possible. And I agree that having a presence at those crossings at Quincy and Colorado do act as a deterrent. They could also just, riders could just be making note that we're there and now they've passed by us. And so they're going to continue with their speeding or, continue on if we didn't notice that they were on an e-bike, which honestly brings up quite a different subject, is that the e-bikes are starting to be disguised a little better just with the battery technology that they're building them into the frames of the bikes quite a bit now. And so really identifying the e-bikes is going to be a challenge for us in some sense, but as far as deployment goes out onto the canal itself, Commissioner Wolf was correct. We did have a stint where we were out on our mountain bikes quite a bit more. That's really dependent on our staffing levels on that particular day. And can we get somebody out there? So, we always strive to try to get a bike out on the road. But our main priorities is to have officers and patrol cars so that we can quickly respond to calls if we're needed to.
And putting a patrol car on the Highline, if you've ever driven a patrol car on the Highline, most people don't like to see the car on the Highline. It takes up a lot of space, and if we were ever to try and stop somebody, I'm just imagining if somebody was speeding and we were going to try and stop that speeder, that could get pretty dangerous to try and drive a car to catch an e-bike on the High Line. And we are predominantly, we are in vehicles. And then if somebody is on an e-bike and we have an officer on a regular bike, the officer is not going to be able to catch the person on the e-bike. They're going to easily be able to get away from the officer.
Right, so I understand that enforcement is difficult, and I know we need to keep working on this. And it does concern me when bicycles speed by. I've been injured 3 or 4 times in my life by crazy bicyclists not yielding right of way and being careless. And when, you know, there's liability involved, and I feel for the citizens who are concerned for safety. And I really would like to work on safety precautions more than prohibition of e-bikes. I mean, there's a clear difference between an e-bike and a motorcycle, for example. And I don't know when this line is going to get blurred and when this is going to come back to the commission. And I'd just really like to brainstorm some strategies to make sure that everyone feels safe, first and foremost.
Chair Dahl, if I can jump in, and I appreciate the discussion before. I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
And one is, we are looking at e-bikes, which are basically battery powered. And it brings up the question that I've gotten from a number of people of, well, if you're going to allow e-bikes, how about those one wheels or any of the other electric propelled items?
Yeah.
How do we legally limit this just to bicycles? And number 2, should we limit it only to bicycles if we're going to allow them at all? That's my first question. My second question is, what is Greenwood doing with respect to e-bikes on the canal and on their trail system? And I guess I would have a third question, and that is that 11380 that talks about operation of motor vehicles that prohibits them says that you can't have them on any trail in the city. And obviously our on-street trails, that provision cannot apply. So I'd recommend to the city attorney that we consider revamping 11380 to talk about except for on-street trails. But it does bring up the question of that an e-bike being a part of the road for an on-street trail would be permitted anyway, would it not?
Okay,
Those are
can
my
you
3
hear me?
questions.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I had to switch to my phone. My internet really is uncooperative tonight. So Rob, to answer your first question, what other jurisdictions have done in terms of writing the code is use the state-defined classes of e-bikes to add into their municipal code to be specific about what types of motorized vehicles they're really allowing.
So Greenwood, I thought was, go ahead.
Greenwood Village is currently prohibits e-bikes, but they are beginning this. I don't know if they're ready yet, but they are going to this spring be examining this issue with their own Parks Commission and seeing if they are going to change their municipal code as well. And I apologize, I don't.
Road to allow them.
They're going to go through the same process that you all are going through right now. So I'm not sure what the outcome will be.
It just seems impractical to me to prohibit e-bikes on the Highland Canal through Cherry Hills, because nobody coming down from Denver, you can have the biggest sign in the world at Hamden on the Highland Canal. If they're on an e-bike, they're not going to stop. They're going to keep right on going. And enforcement is going to be basically non-existent. But if we can just keep them on the High Line, to me, that, you know, that makes the most sense. I did come across a few weeks ago 2 guys on those thick wheels that you stand like you're on a surfboard, and they're on a dirt trail with these wheels. And I did stop them and just explain to them, you're not allowed on this trail. That is considered a motorized vehicle. And they're looking at me like, what are you on, for Mars or something? So we've got to do a better job of explaining what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Well, and I think Commissioner Wolf, that comment goes to my question of what is the rational basis to exclude other electric items, but allow an electric bicycle? Or do you just treat them all, any electric propelled item is considered to be allowable on our trails? In your instance, the Highland Canal, but eliminate that exemption from our code.
Emily, what is the I know there's no motorized vehicles on trails, but in terms of the asphalt, so Quincy Avenue, Holly, Colorado Boulevard, Clarkson, is an e-bike permitted on the asphalt sidewalks? I know we call them trails, but sidewalks for that, are they allowed?
You know, I would have to look at, I am not entirely sure now that you say that, because
I
I'm
think
not
one of the
sure.
sergeants answered that before.
Well, he said that
I
they
would
could
think that would be
ticket them.
part of
on
the
those.
road, because you're physically on, I mean, it's part of the road right of way. So at that point, I believe it's not considered a trail under the code. I believe you would be operating a
Okay.
vehicle on the road.
Okay,
The
so then
sergeant-
what we're really looking at is, do we want e-bikes, or do we want, let's, I guess, start with the general question of e-bike or motorized vehicles on our crusher fine trails and our natural bridle path trails? Because it sounds like with the asphalt, because they're right of ways from the roadways, and the sergeants did say earlier, they didn't say they were roadways, they did say that they could ticket on them. So I think that it wouldn't be trail. So we're just really talking about those two. So
I'll just add, only because my neighborhood has dirt streets that are considered on-street trails, that I don't know where they fit within the three categories that Emily put forth in her memo, but I assume they're under asphalt.
On-street trails are totally left off of the matrix because they're not, on-street
You're right,
trails are sort of on the map, but they're not formally designated in any way. So when the trails map was created, those on-street trails were drawn really to show natural connections on lower traffic volume streets to connect to the different bridle trails. But what are shown as on-street trails on our maps aren't actually designated trails under the code, if that makes sense.
But again, maybe we can ask the police officers that they don't have a problem with an e-bike being on Holly Street, for instance, on the on-street trail.
No, I was talking about the small section on Quincy where the trail and the street are one, but where they're separate and it's a separate trail, that's going to fall under the trail.
What about, well then ask the question this way, this is Jay. Are e-bikes allowed on roads? Dirt roads, gravel roads, asphalt roads?
Yeah, as far as I know, they are. Yeah, because
Okay,
they're treated the same way as a
that's
bicycle.
how that would be. Yep.
And I guess I'll interject because I know Commissioner Eber, you brought this up in terms of other vehicles, and Commissioner Wolf, you said you saw, I don't know if they're hoverboards or whatever they are. I don't know enough about those other motorized vehicles, including golf carts and things like that, to know how do each of those motors compare, right? And I think, so I will tell you right now, Emily, am hard pressed to make any sort of recommendations or opinion on that, just because I don't know how fast golf carts can go. I don't know how fast those, and so to compare them to e-bikes and things like that, I know that's a lot, but I just don't know that I have, and maybe somebody can speak to it or anything else. I just don't have enough personal knowledge about what each of those do to know if we're including those or not including those, because I can see the arguments both ways in regards to, well, if you're going to let e-bikes on, then you need to let all these other motorized vehicles on.
Yeah, and I apologize. I maybe should have I set this matrix up based on what we talked about last time. And we had talked about having a grid of different types of trails versus different types of vehicles. But the question really in front of PTRC right now is focused on the e-bikes themselves. If you would like to take on that other motorized vehicles issue, you can. I can bring you more information at the next meeting. But e-bikes is the more pressing issue for this meeting.
Okay.
And that is major focus. These hoverboards, and I can't imagine these kids on a Razor scooter going down these trails. It's just not comfortable for them in the on the dirt and the mud and all of that business. So it really boils down to, in my mind, e-bikes. And these trails were established years and years ago as a relaxing place for people to walk, for people to run, to people to push their baby strollers. And all of a sudden you introduce these e-bikes. And believe me, I've never seen an e-bike come by me and warn me that they're coming. All of a sudden they're right beside you. And that's true for bicyclists as well. They just don't even come close to being courteous to other trail users. And so I think we have to do something with better signage, whatever, to just keep them contained. I sure don't want to see them on our dirt bridle trails. That's just a huge problem. So.
Let me comment that I guess your staff recommendation asks us if we are interested in making a change. And I will tell you that my hope is that we continue to ask for the community's input on this. I am personally not prepared at this point to make a recommendation that I do want to change the code. I would rather have a prohibition, enforceable or not, as it currently is, until I know that people want to have this. I do think we did have a gentleman come to us as a public comment a number of meetings ago telling us that he had some type of surgery, and part of his rehab is that he uses an e-bike and it allows him access to the trails that he's walked for many, many, many years. Cherry Hills on one hand is graying, and those people deserve to use our open spaces the same way. And at the other hand, you've got, the perception, like Fred believes, that, or a number of people perceive, it's not only Fred, that e-bikes are not the appropriate place to have them on our trails, or anything for that matter. And frankly, I don't know yet where I come down on this, to the point that I don't feel I can make a recommendation that I want to change the code. The only substantive authority that I have seen is, we heard from the guy from the bike program saying that there weren't more accidents with e-bikes. And we heard tonight from Ms. Chrisman that there are more injuries with e-bikes. So, if I'm going to base this on safety, I still don't have the answer. And I need to know more before I say I want to change the code.
Thank you, Commissioner Eber, and I don't disagree with you on that. I just don't know that we've heard from enough to know what our community actually really wants at this point. Commissioner Scott, we haven't heard from you on this. I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I want to make sure we don't leave out your comments as well.
I appreciate, I think my original thought when commenting both on your Chair Dahl's comments and also Commissioner Leviton's comments were that, to separate this out into different trails and simultaneously keep everybody safe and kind of create maybe not a prohibition situation, but just sort of a general tone as to what the position is of Cherry Hills. I would see it as more of a blanket situation. So I feel that if it's known in Cherry Hills that e-bikes aren't really welcome, whether it's on a paved road, it's on a bridle trail, it's on the Highland Canal, then it's just a general tone, that while it's difficult to enforce in any of those different mediums, it still is something that if it's known that it's not really welcome, then that's just sort of the culture, so to speak, in addition to the code. But I think to the point, building further onto that not knowing really enough about the code, I think we have the opportunity to set a precedent here if Greenwood Village hasn't done it yet. So I do think that there is that, and there might be a timely issue there, depending on when they're going to have their meeting. But I mean, from what I know and from what I've seen, I understand the concern about anything motorized at all, whether it's a Segway or an e-bike, but we just want to focus on e-bikes tonight. So my position overall is generally just feeling that it should be decided in all practicality. It should be decided as it's either an okay thing or it's not, because it's going to be hard to enforce no matter what, whether it's just decided not to be on the Highland Canal or in all over. So it should sort of become a combination of policy and culture. That's my feeling. If I had to make a decision today, I would say no e-bikes, but if that's something that's going to be tabled for more information, then I'm happy to listen.
Thank you. And I guess I would echo Commissioner Scott's position on it is difficult already and is not enforced, but to say one trail can have it, the next trail cannot. I don't know if it was Jay or somebody else who said it, but how does somebody get from one place to the other on their e-bike if they're a resident in Cherry Hills? And I think it does create an issue. So I know, Emily, it's probably not what you want to hear, but I think all of us right now, or I guess I shouldn't speak for all of us, I will summarize it. From what I am hearing, it sounds like we are not in a position that we're going to really say, yes, we want to make a change to the code, and also not the other direction of, no, we do not want to make a change to the code. I think at this point right now, we're all kind of in a place where, while this is an issue in the state of Colorado, because people bike and everything else, is it an issue for our community? And I don't know that we've heard from enough people to know that this is truly an issue for our community, or is it just becoming an issue because we are bringing it to their attention through articles in the Villager and things like that, the Village Crier. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that.
I had a question. Do any of us bike frequently? Do any of us currently here, out of the 12 participants, use either regular bikes or e-bikes frequently? Or are we kind of like the blind, trying to lead the blind? Like, do any of us have a specific vested interest other than we don't like seeing it or we wish it was enforced more? Do any of us have a personal interest in the biking and e-bike laws of Cherry Hills Village?
I bicycle, but not e-bike.
Thanks for that. And that's just like, I don't understand. And I like what Chair Dahl said and Commissioner Eber said, is it's kind of like all over the place. Some people want a complete ban. Some people want a complete legalization and no enforcement. And then there's all these other gray areas in between. And I am kind of sort of leaning towards what Chelsea suggested, that I think eventually we're going to have to pick one side or the other. And I don't know where I fall at this point.
So Emily, what would be your suggestion at this point?
I think that what we can do, since I am advertising February's meeting in the Crier, and I actually already have signups, so I think you will get a good amount of public input at that meeting. So what I can do is, if the commission would prefer to hold off on giving us a specific direction until after that meeting, you'll be able to hear from the public. I can also compile for that meeting all of the public comment that we've gotten over the past few months as we've been publishing things in the crier, trying to make people more aware that currently e-bikes are not allowed on the trails. And Chair Dahl, you're right. We're getting a lot of feedback based on what we're putting out, which hopefully will, all of that together will hopefully help PTRC make more of a consensus decision at the next meeting. So I put a tentative timeline in your packets in this memo. And originally I would bring you municipal code language for the next meeting. We could just shift this timeline a month out for each of these meetings, and I could bring you proposed language following the March, or at the following meeting in March.
Yeah, I think that's great. That would help me tremendously. And I think that once we get some more weigh-in, and as you said, Chair Dahl, if you have more than one person and just a better kind of idea of what the community is thinking, that would be really helpful. And then from my perspective and my thoughts are that instead of breaking it down into these different individual types of locations that people could, can or can't have an e-bike, it just then becomes a choice in the next meeting or the month that we decide we're going to make this choice as to whether or not e-bikes are something that are permissible or not permissible in the community as a whole.
Emily, this is Fred. Do you know if Harriet Lemaire and the Highland Canal folks, do they have a position on e-bikes?
I don't know that they have an official position, but most of every other jurisdiction along the High Line besides Cherry Hills and Greenwood Village do allow them on the High Line, and the Conservancy hasn't pushed back on that at all.
Your memo, Emily, said that the Conservancy is going to run an education campaign next year. Still in the planning stages.
This year. Yes, I apologize. That's carryover from the last memo, so it should say this year. So this summer, the Highland Conservancy is planning to do awareness raising and tabling along the High Line in order to, raise awareness about speeding, about what is and is not permitted, about how to politely share the trail, that you should announce yourself when you're passing, basically everything to let trail users all have a better and safer experience. And their idea is that, in combination with the new signs, the wayfinding signs that have rules as well that are being installed this summer, it'll help people better understand how to safely use and share the trail.
Question real quick, if I can, and that goes to the enforcement question on the canal and on our other trails. We heard from the sergeants, but I guess my question comes up of, what is right now the process if there is a bicycle pedestrian accident on a trail? Is there an assignment of liability, much the same way there is in a traffic situation on the middle of a road? Or is that a piece of private litigation on public property that the parties plead their own, go talk to their own insurance companies and they battle it out?
My knowledge, we haven't had any recent events where there was collisions between bicyclists and pedestrians, or bicyclists just for that matter, where the police were involved in anything more than documenting the incident. To my knowledge, we have not had any accidents where we've issued citations to a bicyclist or anybody else when the motor vehicle wasn't involved.
Gotcha. So no different than two people running into each other in the middle of Three Pond Park.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not sure, Sergeant Stremmel, if you have any more recent knowledge of us issuing a citation on an accident where it was strictly just bicyclists involved.
Right. That would be treated as more of a private property accident. And I don't recall having any accident between a pedestrian or bicyclist or bicyclist and a bicyclist on the canal. So we've had accidents with motor vehicles and bicyclists crossing at the street intersections, but not anything specifically on the canal.
But if there's an assault on the canal, you guys are allowed to cite or arrest somebody for an assault that takes place on the canal. And seemingly also, if a bicycle was used recklessly, that would also allow for enforcement action.
So we would be allowed on the canal to enforce the model traffic code under these specific situations: careless bicycling or reckless bicycling. So those two would apply on the canal, that we could cite somebody with a model traffic code citation.
So we do have some enforcement mechanisms on the canal, just not based on speed.
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah. And those careless and reckless would really pertain if there was an accident that took place where we could establish that somebody, that either the bicyclist or the pedestrian caused the accident in a careless manner.
So I think maybe at this point, Emily, I think you can kind of gather where we're all at. And I think, you know, I would like to hear more from the public. So I think gathering more public comments, and then after next month's commission meeting, we can maybe have a better idea of where we all stand on this, and then can make some recommendations. Does that work?
Yes. Is there anything besides all of that public input that I can bring to the next meeting that PTRC would like more information on?
I'd like to have the person that owns the bike store on Colorado Boulevard tell us what, if any, statistical, I mean, or somebody, we did have the Bicycle Association person from Bike Colorado. I'm still, you know, I think we're going to end up with public being split or non-participatory in ours. I hope that that is not the case. But I think we're going to come back with a split, and at some point we're going to have to get off the fence. And so I do think we need to understand safety issues, because my sense is that the few people who do bicycle to Cherry Hills Village Elementary School and maybe to West Middle School, that if you know, e-bikes exist in the village, there's no question, especially amongst our young people. And, you know, I do think that there is a heavy sentiment that while I may not own an e-bike, lots of people do. And they are used on our feeder bridle trails to get to the canal. They're used on the Mansfield part of the village trail to not have to ride along Quincy to go down to the elementary school. And then they cut through on Lynn Road, I believe it is. So, you know, they are out there and heavily prevalent. I just hope that people will come to us and tell us what they want to do.
I think they will. I think you'll hear from folks.
Okay. Thank you. And I think for all the commissioners, if there is something that you can think of after we get off this call that, you know, you say that information would be helpful, I think you can email Emily directly or Pamela, and we can kind of go from there. Does that work, Emily?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. Perfect. So we will move on from that to new business. I don't think I have anything in my pocket on new business. Is that correct, Emily?
There is no new business.
Fantastic. All right. So in regards to reports, I guess we can start. Let's start with I will tell you reports from myself as the chair. The areas that I am in charge of is generally events. So I don't have a whole lot to report. We didn't have the car show. We didn't have the holiday gathering that we normally do. So we will obviously, if we are able this year and it is safe, we will try and have some sort of event probably at the end of 2021, but we will kind of wait and see on that. So I don't have any updates in terms of that for anybody. I'm just going to go down for who I can see. Commissioner Eber, do you have any reports?
Very short, one
Can
reporting and thanks.
I'm sorry, can I just jump in really briefly? I'm going to let Sergeant Rolfing and Sergeant Stremmel go on with their evenings because I'm sure they have things they need to get to. So thank you to both of you. If you want to sign off at this point, you're welcome to. Thank you for your help.
Yep,
Thank you
thanks
both
for
for
having
being
us.
here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And Rob, I'm sorry for interrupting. Go
problem.
ahead.
Absolutely no problem at all. Real quick report that I want to thank Jeff Roberts for installing and then switching to a new location, the poop station bags in neighborhood where I live off of Albion Street. I wanted to report that it does have a lot of footprints in the snow and the trash can does seem to be moderately full. So I think it is getting use and is a good thing to have in the neighborhood. I will tell you that I think since we have very unfinished edges of our properties in most of my neighborhood, that a lot of people believe that dog waste or pet waste is not easily seen, and therefore there still is not as much use as there ought to be in our neighborhood, but I'm not sure how to change that or make it any different than what goes on in the rest of the village. I do secondly think that a couple of meetings ago when we looked at the question of vacating property, I do think that PTRC in particular should be looking at an evaluation of what the criteria are to vacate or replace an easement or a trail. And frankly, what I would like to see done is right now the code currently says that it's basically an evaluation of the value of the property. And I would like to increase that to be multiple values of the property because frankly, the underlying square footage is too cheap versus what it adds to somebody who is trying to make an assembly. And it's just not fair for the village to have to give up its property rights for such an inexpensive trade-off. So I do know that there is some discretion in that, but my hope is that we embark on a strengthening of that to allow more compensation or consideration to come to the village as a means to justify vacating a trail. I think that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Eber. I appreciate it. Commissioner Scott.
Do not have anything.
All right. Commissioner Wolf. Do we still have Fred on?
Yes. He's still showing as being here, but he is not showing his audio connected anymore.
Okay. Sorry, Fred. I apologize. I must skip you. Commissioner.
Hi, three short things. I'm working on a dark sky. Yes, Emily's right. We do not qualify. However, there's other ways to be basically an ally of the Dark Sky Initiative, as in we support it. We already have in our code, we have a ton of light restrictions. I don't know who was here when Kent tried to put lighting up for night sports games, and the city overwhelmingly was like, no way, we want dark skies, not gonna happen. So that should be pretty easy. I'm also working in law school. I'm not in law school, I'm sorry, I'm in pre-law, and trying to use what I'm learning and applying it to what the kind of work I'm doing here. Last, you already know the update because I sent you the email. It's called the Wilderness Initiative, and I'm struggling with semantics as far as what wilderness would even mean, or if I should redirect it towards pre-existing definitions of open space initiative, which also is already in line with with a lot of the work and statutes in our city code. So that's my report. I think that's all.
Perfect. And I think we did get your email regarding kind of open space and things like that. And so, you know, we can kind of talk offline, but I know that a lot of it had to do with land preservation and things like that. And I know that the Cherry Hills Land Preserve is, you know, an incredible group, and it is their focus. And so a lot of it, you may want to connect with them, Commissioner
I
Levin.
just got the message out 2 days ago. So
Perfect. All right.
I'm here for the long haul. I told Emily it may take me 21 years, but I'm going to get this done.
All right. Well,
Thank you
perfect.
for support.
All right. Is there anybody I have forgotten? I don't see Fred's audio on, so I will move on to staff updates.
I would just ask Commissioner Levitin, just to clarify, are those initiatives that you're asking the rest of the commission to take on, or are those things that you are working on individually?
If any of you are motivated to join me and would like to volunteer and participate, I would love support. I've often gotten work done independently and will continue regardless of commission support. It depends on our priorities, how much time we have, and what we would like to get done. So I don't know, is my answer, Ms. Black. Do I want to make it a priority? It's always been a priority. So yes, I would love to make it a bigger priority.
Is that for PTRC, for the commission?
For the commission, at least after this e-bikes thing, after we make some progress resolving the e-bikes, you know, I'll work on independently at least for another 4 or 5 months, unless any of you are really interested in helping me.
All right. And I think, Emily, I think probably to your point is, as we have previously discussed and decided the priorities for 2021, I know that the staff is trying to make sure that they keep in line and get us the information we need to properly move forward on those priorities. And so any kind of deviation from what we've already discussed, I know kind of throws a lot to you all. So for now, I think we move forward with our priorities, and Commissioner Levitin can work on, you know, the things that are important to him individually. And if you want to present something, I think, Tori, to the group, and have us discuss if we want to change any sort of priorities, we can do that. But for now, I think we stay the course and keep our priorities as they are, if that's okay with everybody.
Understood. And I don't really have much of a proposal other than the establishment of a proposal. So I'm still working on it.
All right, perfect.
Thanks.
Emily, does that work for you?
Yes, Tori, just let us know, you know, if you want to bring, when you have a little bit more background for us, if you want to bring something to the commission, just let me know ahead of a meeting and we'll get you sorted out and on an agenda.
Here, Dahl, if I can just make 2 announcements that I forgot to make.
Sure.
One, I just want to remind everybody to stay involved with following all the goings on about Quincy Farm. Obviously, it is a multi-million-dollar property with multi-million-dollar questions. And as a major part of the village open space portfolio, I continue to believe that PTRC has a major role in the discussion about that piece of property. So I want to have everybody stay involved. Secondly, when things start getting rolling again on the master plan, we have a major role in that as well. As you all know, there's been sort of a committee set up, but I do think there are a number of environmental and land use issues that should be inserted in the master plan and reinforced. And I think that's a major opportunity for PTRC's involvement. So I really encourage people to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Eber. Absolutely.
Quickly wanted to show you this map. I got a puzzle, 500 pieces around Quincy and Colorado, my house. And looking at it, there's already about 10 to 20% of open space. I just wanted kind of a declaration as a model for other jurisdictions around us that it is indeed a priority, and to have private landowners agree to that, which I've already had several of my neighbors do, at least support. So that's all I got for that edition.
Okay. Emily, any reports from the city?
Yes, so I apologize. I think I just disappeared, but I still have you all on the phone, so I'm just going to carry on. I'm sorry you lost the screen share. I will be reaching out to all of you next week to schedule a work session for PTRC to.
Emily, we lost your sound. You're on mute. Still muted. Still muted. There we
Type
go.
it in the comments.
There we go.
I
Can you
think
hear
she
me?
was on her phone. I don't.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
hear you.
now we can.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I'm on my phone and the computer trying to make technology work. So thanks for your patience. We have, I don't know what you missed, so I'll start over. We have some important issues coming up that we want to make sure that PTRC is prepared for. We have some more detailed applications probably coming up in the next few months. So we want to make sure that you are comfortable and ready for those. So I'll be reaching out early next week to schedule a special work session with PTRC, not related to anything specific. It's really going to give you a chance to ask questions. The city attorney will sit in on the work session. You'll be able to ask questions of her about PTRC's scope and role in the overall city and your role as it pertains to council recommendations. So look for that email next week. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, my phone just made an excellent noise. Sorry, this is really flustering me. The Highland Canal Underpass construction is progressing very well. We have just closed the trail north of the Covington Bridge so that they can excavate for the abutment for the new bridge to go in. So that is moving forward, and we expect to be finished that construction and connected to the underpass by this summer. So fingers crossed. For John Mead Park, some of our shipments were held up for our hardware and lumber to be able to put some finishing touches on the playground. They finally just came in, so HPM, our contractor, is lined up next week to hopefully knock that stuff out and open our playground up. And lastly, for Quincy Farm, council has requested that staff draft an RFP for management of the farm. So we will be bringing that to the first council meeting in February for council to consider. And those are all my reports. I don't know.
Can you explain this?
Oh, go ahead.
Can you explain the scope of that recommendation? Because I guess I don't fully understand. For Quincy Farm.
What the RFP entails?
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't hear properly. You said council has asked you for a recommendation, and then I got lost.
Oh, I'm sorry. Council has asked staff to draft a request for proposals for Quincy Farm. So we're putting together an RFP, a draft of an RFP for council to consider and eventually put out for different organizations to send in proposals for the management of the farm.
Thank you, Emily. Commissioner Ebert, did that answer your question?
It did. It just seemed a bit odd that it's a little bit of a cart before the horse, because I don't think we've gotten to the point where we've decided that we're going to lease it out or have somebody operate it versus the city or giving it back to the other people. So I'll wait and reserve judgment.
All right, perfect. Is there anything else before I adjourn the meeting?
Yeah, so the workday, is that something that's online again? Is that like or is that just an email, I guess? So you said there's going to be a workday for PTRC.
Yeah, so I'll send an email out with a doodle poll to be able to schedule it. And we will probably do an evening meeting just so that it's accessible for everybody.
Okay, and is there any conversation around this returning to in-person anytime, or that's not even on the table yet?
Not at this point.
Okay, thanks.
One day, Chelsea.
Yes, one day we will return. I know it, you're right.
And one more thing real quick for everybody is that tomorrow is the deadline for rec reimbursement. I've gotten a few of them from commission members, but 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. If you are going to submit, please do it by then.
Thank you, Pamela. All right. If there's nothing further, it is 7:42 and I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Y'all
All right,
have a great
everyone.
week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you all.